food to put on the table. So the President will ask the Department of Agriculture to consider taking immediate steps to provide nutrition assistance to hard-hit families. First, by increasing pandemic EBT benefits by about 15%. This is the program that is aimed at supporting families who traditionally rely on the school lunch program to provide meals to millions of kids through their schools. So in the pandemic EBT program provides direct assistance to families to cover those costs. But the way it is being implemented today doesn't get to the full costs necessary. So with these changes, an eligible family with 3 children would get about an additional $100 over 2 months to help pay for food. Second, increasing the SNAP benefits, emergency SNAP benefits for as many as 12 million low-income Americans. This is the core program targeted at preventing hunger in America. And these changes, again, for a family of 4 would mean about a 15 to 20% benefit increase. And third, revising the Thrifty Food Plan, which is really the basis for determining the SNAP benefits, is out of date and needs to be updated to better reflect the cost of a healthy diet. Another element of this executive order is to promote worker safety. And here, President Biden will ask the Department of Labor to consider clarifying that workers have a federally guaranteed right to refuse employment that would jeopardize their health. And if they do so, they will still qualify for unemployment insurance. This is a common sense step to make sure that workers have a right to safe work environments and that we don't put workers in the middle of a pandemic in a position where they have to choose between their own livelihoods and the health of they and their families. The second executive order that the President will sign is focused on the jobs of federal workers and on federal contractors. He will direct his administration to initiate a process starting today that would allow him within 100 days to issue an executive order requiring federal contractors to pay at least a $15 minimum wage and provide emergency paid leave to workers. This was something that the President talked about on the campaign, that when we're using taxpayer dollars, federal contractors should provide the benefits and pay that workers deserve. The order will also protect and empower federal employees who've dedicated their careers to serving the American people, many in very difficult circumstances during this pandemic. And the steps will include restoring collective bargaining power and worker protections for federal workers, eliminating Schedule F, so-called Schedule F, which is threatened the protections of career employees and also provided a potential pathway to burrow political appointees into civil service. And also promoting a $15 minimum wage by directing the OPM, the Office of Public Management, to develop recommendations to pay more federal workers at least $15 an hour. Finally, just one final note, in addition to the executive orders that we'll be issuing today, we will be focusing on another key priority of the President and the Vice President, which is equitable relief to small businesses. In previous rounds of relief, too much of the support that has been dedicated to small businesses has left out the smallest businesses, mom and pop businesses that don't have existing connections with a financial institution, and in particular, Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American-owned businesses were shut out completely. And a lot of that is because the outreach and communication from the federal government was either unclear or just non-existent. And so too many of those companies have been denied relief, and many of them have had to shut their doors for good. The President is completely focused on changing that, and he has directed us to take immediate steps to make sure that we're listening to these communities, we're taking their advice on how to improve the distribution of relief. So just this morning, I met, along with representatives of the Small Business Administration, with dozens of groups representing Black and brown-owned businesses and other underserved communities, as well as lenders, to hear their ideas on how we can improve communications and act on them. We discussed the President's idea of having navigators who are dedicated to helping small business owners find the right relief programs, fill out paperwork, get the money into their bank accounts, the kind of support that many of these businesses don't have because of embedded relationships that more well-connected businesses do. There are some groups out there in the country who are doing this really successfully. We're determined to learn from them and to scale those efforts nationwide. And in this vein, I look forward, I will be joining the Vice President Harris later today. She will be meeting with small business owners to discuss both the American Rescue Plan and the need for more effective small business relief delivered without delay. So that is today. That is our focus through a set of executive orders. And I'm happy to take a couple questions, of which you all have many. Sure, okay. Sure. This is the good cop, bad cop thing.
Christy, go ahead. Thanks, Jen. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Good to see you. Thank you for taking questions today. I want to ask you about the call on Sunday with a bipartisan group of lawmakers. What can you tell us about the call? Will President Biden be on the call? And what is your message to moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney, who say the economy can't have another stimulus after you just passed a $900 billion relief package last month?
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. So the president has made clear to his team that we should be reaching out to members of Congress from both parties to make the case for the rescue plan and to engage with them, understand their concerns. So that's what we're doing, both myself and senior members of the team. We have been doing that over the course of time. We'll continue to do that, including the call on Sunday that I'll be doing with a group of senators, and we'll continue that engagement going forward. In terms of the message, it's pretty clear. We're at a precarious moment for the virus and the economy. Without decisive action, we risk falling into a very serious economic hole, even more serious than the crisis we find ourselves in. And economists across the board, including today President Trump's former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, arguing strenuously that now is the time for that type of decisive action for the economy, and that we can't wait to provide the resources to make sure that we can open schools, we can get vaccine shots in people's arms, and we can provide that bridging relief to families and small businesses. There's a lot of support. I met with a group of mayors yesterday, bipartisan group of mayors from across the country. You hear from mayors, you hear from governors just crying out that in order to take on these crises, the public health and the pandemic and the economic crisis at the same time, now is the moment for that kind of decisive action. That's the case we'll be making.
And just to be clear, Brian, will President Biden be on the call? And if not, why not, if this is so urgent?
So, like I said, we're doing all outreach. The president has directed the team to do outreach to members of Congress, to business and labor organizations, to mayors and governors, and we're in the process of doing that. I'll be having that conversation on Sunday. You can expect that other members of the administration will be engaging with members of Congress across time as well.
And just very quickly, Brian, if I could, what would a February impeachment trial, how would a February impeachment trial impact getting the COVID relief package passed?
Look, I think that we are facing right now a period of multiple crises. And what we're going to need is to be able to act on multiple fronts. And so that's certainly, we understand, and as Jen has spoken to, we understand that the Senate has a constitutional obligation in this context. But we also have these pressing economic and pandemic priorities as well. So that's why we're engaging. That's why we're focused on making the case, and certainly with the expectation that Congress will heed that call and move forward.
I promised to do a whole briefing after this, so just we'll do econ questions for Brian.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. If you are able to pass this nearly $2 trillion plan, do you envision this being the last round of stimulus, or do you think you may need to do more?
What I can tell you is if we don't act now, we will be in a much worse place, and we will find ourselves needing to do much more to dig out of a much deeper hole. So the single most important thing economically right now is to take decisive action along the lines of what we've laid out in this rescue plan. And you hear, again, from economists across the board, whether it's the Federal Reserve, the International Monetary Fund, and economic experts across the political spectrum as well. When you're at a moment that is as precarious as the one we find ourselves in, the risk of doing too little, the risk of undershooting far outweighs the risk of doing too much. And that's the economic logic, the economic case behind this package. I think you've also heard the president clearly explain that his economic approach is one where rescue and recovery need to come together. And he'll be speaking more about his recovery plans in the coming weeks that are about building back better, an urgent priority to start creating the kinds of good jobs that we know we're going to need coming out of this crisis.
And after the recession, it took nearly a decade to get the country back to full employment under the Obama administration. If you're able to pass this rescue package, how long do you think it will take for every American who wants a job to be able to have one?
Well, I would just point to, just one example of an independent analysis that was done of the American Rescue Plan by Moody's. And what they said, what they found was that if we passed the American Rescue Plan now, we could see 7.5 million jobs created just this year. And we could see a return to full employment a full year ahead of what is projected if we don't. So those are the stakes involved. And without this kind of decisive action, we're going to have a much deeper economic hole. And that's why we are so focused on making the case for decisive action now.
Justin?
Thanks, Jen and Brian. I wanted to follow on Walker's question a little bit. The President's talked about seeking unity on this bill, but also being clear-eyed when there's policy differences. So I'm wondering if after this call, which is with sort of the bipartisan coalition that you'd need to get this bill passed, if you expect to know whether the White House will pursue legislation, bipartisan legislation, or sort of head towards legislation through reconciliation. And I'm also wondering if you could talk about what sort of red lines will be, the point at which you say, okay, if you're not willing to negotiate about this in the bill, we're going to just start working with Democrats as Speaker Pelosi and others have encouraged you to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd say two things to that. The first is, if you look at the elements of the American Rescue Plan, it was designed with a bottom-up focus on what are experts saying is the actual need. What's the actual need to get schools open? What's the actual need to have a national vaccination distribution plan to underwrite the strategy that you heard Dr. Fauci and the president talk about yesterday? And what's the need to support families and businesses during this transition? And the second thing is that as a result of that, I think we're seeing a lot of support. As I said, bipartisan mayors, bipartisan governors, business organizations, Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, economists across the board saying this is an appropriate response to an unprecedented economic circumstance. So that's the approach that we are taking, and that's the perspective that we are bringing here. And I think that we are heartened to see that kind of support. And that's the conversation that we're going to have with members of Congress, be they Republicans or Democrats, including looking at where we are, where we've come over the last year, and the lessons we've learned. That without decisive action, we know the consequences. And so now is a moment not to undershoot or to wait and see. Now is a moment to act.
Right. I guess my question is, I think a lesson that a lot of President Obama and others have talked about from the ACA fight was continuing to court Republican support beyond a point of it being productive. And so I'm wondering for you guys, what is the decision point going to be where you might have Republican mayors, but it doesn't look like you have Republican senators right now. At what point do you say this is no longer worth kind of pushing forward?
We're making the case. We are engaging. We're having conversations. We're listening. And we are also focused on the urgency and the need to act. And so, what I can tell you is that's where the president's focus is. That's where the vice president's focus is. That'll continue to be our focus. Is we want to engage and we want to act, and that's going to be what guides us here.
It's going to be the last one, but Brian will come back.
Thank you for doing this, Brian. Back to the point of the objections of some of these Republican senators. who have already spoken out. They say they just passed 900 million or so at the end of the year. Most of it isn't even out yet. How do you know, if that money hasn't gotten into the system yet, that you even need to release more at this point? Why move ahead with a $1 trillion plan if the 900 million that's already been approved hasn't even gotten out there?
Sure. Well, first of all, we waited for 6 months or more before Congress acted, and so really a lot of what that 900 billion was doing was filling a hole in the second half of 2020 that desperately needed to be filled, and so this is not an issue of Congress acting too much. It's an issue of not acting enough. And the second is, if you look at the components of the $900 billion, again, we could go line by line, but these are resources that are either already out the door or are addressing economic challenges or public health challenges that were in the rearview mirror. So as we find ourselves today, looking forward, we need a very decisive set of actions if we are actually going to get schools open, if we're actually going to get a vaccination program up and running. And I think that the case that we will make is that today we're not where we need to be. And if we go line by line in the American Rescue Plan, these provisions have been designed based on an assessment of need. And we think they're going to absolutely be necessary. So, I think that looking forward, we're quite confident that this is the prudent assessment of needs.
And I want to clarify two quick things. How many federal employees or federal contractors are making minimum wage right now? Do you guys know?
So I don't have an estimate of that right now.
And then last night you said that there are roughly 8 million people who haven't received their stimulus checks.
Yes.
How do you find them?
So it's a great question. This is principally an issue associated with people who are non-filers, so they're not filing income taxes, in most cases because they don't make enough money to need to file federal income taxes. And so as a result, the way that the IRS and the Treasury Department in the previous administration has focused on getting those checks out has been to work through the tax system. But those are people who are legally entitled to those checks. So we have a number of strategies that we're going to pursue. And that today we'll start with the President's executive order to direct the Department of Treasury to consider a whole range of efforts, including creating an online portal that would allow people to easily identify if they're eligible, to work through counterpart organizations to actually affirmatively do outreach to communities where we know there are significant numbers of these families and these individuals, to let people know that they may be available. Some of this is education outreach as well. And I would just, it's a little connected to what I was saying about small business as well. What the President is directing all of us to do is to really focus on the affirmative steps that we can take, and an affirmative strategy to say it's not enough to just say, well, if folks don't know or if they don't have a network, then they're left out in the cold. We're gonna work both directly in what the federal government can do and with partner organizations to try to make sure that every American who's entitled to a benefit is actually receiving it.
But if there's someone out there right now who hears you saying this and realizes I'm eligible and I haven't gotten it, right now today, is there a way for them to raise their hand and say, send me my check?
Well, starting today, we're going to start a process to make that a lot easier for families, including being able to go online and do that. But that's work that's going to start today.
I totally skipped the AP, so would you mind taking one more?
I just want to.
Didn't mean to.
Thank you. I just have one small question on the mechanics of the EO targeting the food insecure. Does the USDA have the money to distribute these plus-ups that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Or is there going to need to be appropriations from Congress?
So these are mandatory appropriated programs, so there's no need for additional congressional action. It's a change in regulation on the eligibility for benefits. So these are changes that can be made under existing statute and under existing budgetary authority without any additional action from Congress.
The money's there, though, to...
Yeah, it's a mandatory program, so it operates based on the benefits are paid out based on who is eligible.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I'll be back.
Great. Thank you all.
All right, everyone. Happy Friday. I have a couple of things just at the top, some things you've been asking about, so hopefully they address some of the questions you may have. First, we applaud the Senate's strong bipartisan confirmation of Lloyd Austin, who has been breaking barriers all of his life as the first Black Secretary of Defense in our nation's history. Secretary Austin's confirmation is a major benefit to our national security, and he's going to hit the ground running, leading the Pentagon. He will be sworn in today, but he will be sworn in more officially by the not more officially, I should say, but he will be sworn in more ceremoniously on Monday by the Vice President. Similarly, the President is very happy to see that Janet Yellen, the first woman who would ever lead the U.S. Treasury Department, was unanimously voted out of committee this morning. This should only be the beginning. We're facing unprecedented challenges and threats to our national security during these emergencies, and our country urgently needs our Secretary of Homeland Security in place. Alejandro Mayorkas is one of the most knowledgeable Homeland Security experts in the country. He's earned bipartisan praise, and he's been previously confirmed by the Senate 3 times. This is a confirmation that we are going to continue to press on in all of our engagements and conversations with the Senate. I also have some news to share on the President's response to domestic violent extremism. The January 6th assault on the Capitol and the tragic deaths and destruction that occurred underscored what we have long known. The rise of domestic violent extremism is a serious and growing national security threat. The Biden administration will confront this threat with the necessary resources and resolve. We are committed to developing policies and strategies based on facts, on objective and rigorous analysis, and on our respect for constitutionally protected free speech and political activities. Our initial work on DVE will broadly fall into 3 areas. The first is a tasking from President Biden sent to the ODNI today, requesting a comprehensive threat assessment coordinated with the FBI and DHS on domestic violent extremism. This assessment will draw on the analysis from across the government and, as appropriate, non-governmental organizations. The key point here is that we want fact-based analysis upon which we can shape policy. So this is really the first step in the process, and we will rely on our appropriate law enforcement and intelligence officials to provide that analysis. The second will be the building of an NSC capability to focus on countering domestic violent extremism. As a part of this, the NSC will undertake a policy review effort to determine how the government can share information better about this threat, support efforts to prevent radicalization, disrupt violent extremist networks, and more. There's important work already underway across the interagency in countering DVE, and we need to understand better its current extent and where there may be gaps to address so we can determine the best path forward. The third will be coordinating relevant parts of the federal government to enhance and accelerate efforts to address DVE. This considered, NSC convened process will focus on addressing evolving threats, radicalization, the role of social media, opportunities to improve information sharing, operational responses, and more. Just a couple more items. As you all know, right now the President and Vice President are having lunch. This is something they look forward to doing every week. They'll be discussing their agenda, particularly getting relief to working families and containing the COVID crisis, and I'm sure they'll talk about the last 48 hours as well. Later today, the President will speak with Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. We confirmed that earlier this week. He'll also speak with President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. We'll have readouts of both of those calls when they happen. Yesterday evening, the First Lady held a virtual event to honor and show gratitude for the hard work of educators across the country, especially during this difficult time of COVID-19. She was accompanied by the presidents of both the American Federation of Teachers and National Education Association. Over 11,000 educators attended the virtual meeting. Today, she will tour the Whitman Walker Clinic in Washington, D.C. to highlight and promote support services for cancer patients and caregivers. And while I know that was in our guidance, we want to use this platform here to also share with you information about both the Vice President and the First Lady moving forward. One more item as well. Earlier this morning, or late this morning, I should say, the President called General Daniel Hokanson, who is the head of the National Guard, to thank him for not just his work of the last few weeks, but the work of the National Guard over the last several years. He talked about his own personal commitment and connection to the National Guard, given his son had served previously. And he offered assistance, any assistance needed of both the government, but also on a personal level, and asked him to reach out if there was anything that he ever needed. I will stop there. Just a few updates. So, Amar, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. I know this has been asked of you several times, but now that there is a impeachment trial imminent, does President Biden have a opinion on whether former President Trump should be convicted? And then secondly, with how this is going, you're now getting a little bit of momentum on confirmations. You have all that you need to get going on coronavirus, on the economy, and so forth. Is this just going to slow everything down? And does it also take away from the ability to unify?
Well, first, remarkably, at this moment in history, we have some recent precedent of the Senate conducting an impeachment trial while also doing the business of the American people. And when the trial was being conducted last January, there were also hearings that were happening nearly on a daily basis, and we expect that type of work to continue. I'll also note, purely on an operational level, the House can also proceed and continue to do the work on the American Rescue Plan, move that forward, and we certainly expect and hope that they will do that. But what the president's view is, what cannot be delayed through this process is his proposal to get relief to the American people at this time of crisis. So he's confident, he remains confident after serving decades in the Senate, that the Senate, members of both parties, can walk and chew gum at the same time and can move forward with the business of the American people.
Does he believe that former President Trump should be convicted?
Well, he's no longer in the Senate, and he believes that it's up to the Senate and Congress to determine how they will hold the former president accountable and what the mechanics and timeline of that process will be.
Just on a DVE, if you don't mind, are the tools and methods available to federal law enforcement? Are they what we need right now? Are we still stuck in sort of a post-9/11 mindset? And does there need to be really broad, radical rethinking about how we sort of approach things in the federal law enforcement?
Well, the reason that the president wanted to do this review and the national security team wanted to do this review is because it's a priority to ensure we are assessing what is happening in government and how we can do it better. So clearly more needs to be done. That's why the president is tasking the national security team to do exactly this review on his second full day in office. So it's sending an indication of that. Let me just give you just a little bit more information. Homeland Security Advisor Dr. Liz Sherwood-Randall has asked Joshua Geltzer to pioneer a scoping effort in the first 100 days in coordination with the Senior Director for Counterterrorism, Claire Linkins. Geltzer previously served as the Senior Director for Counterterrorism on the National Security Council from 2015 through 2017. And Deputy Homeland Security Advisor Russ Travers will also bring his extensive experience. So those are some of the people who will be involved in overseeing this review and an assessment of what the steps are going to be following. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thanks, Jen. One on impeachment, and then if I could, on COVID. On impeachment, did House Speaker Nancy Pelosi consult with President Biden before sending the article of impeachment over to the Senate?
I don't have any calls between them to read out for you, Kristen. Obviously, they're in regular touch. I can say, from a previous question you asked Brian, that he's been in touch with members of both parties about his agenda even since he was inaugurated. So obviously a range of topics come up in those discussions, but I don't have anything more to read out for you.
On the timing, Leader McConnell has said that he's going to push for a February timeline. I know that you don't want to comment specifically on the timeline of this, but how would a February trial impact the effort to get COVID relief passed?
Well, the president's expectation, he believes in the Senate and their ability to multitask and get the work and business of the American people done at the same time while they're proceeding with an impeachment trial on whatever timeline it begins and ends on, Kristen. So he's come.
Is mid-February fast enough for
He's
President?
going to leave the timeline up to them. But what is important, and again, there's precedent for this, is that they are continuing to move forward with getting the relief to the American people, because that certainly can't wait and be delayed until March, April, or May. We can't afford that.
If I could follow up with you on what you said about COVID yesterday. You said your goal is 1 million shots per day, which would double, you said, what the Trump administration was doing. According to the CDC, we have reached 1 million shots a day last week. So given that, given the urgent need for vaccinations, why not aim higher?
Well, first of all, we're not packing up our bags and leaving at 100 days. We felt it was important, and we set that goal before any American had received a single shot. So the incoming Biden administration felt it was important to set what was described as a bold and ambitious goal at the time, and many doubted we could even get there. So we want to set our own markers and markers for the American public so that they know we're meeting our goal. If we surpass that, that's great. We're going to continue working after day 100 as well, but there are a number of factors here Dr. Fauci also talked about. It's not just having the access to the vaccine, right? It is about addressing vaccine hesitancy. It's about ensuring we have the materials needed. It's about, and you all have done reporting, of course, on different issues going on in states from New York and others where there are concerns about supply, where there's confusion about the process, and we need to address that. So there are a number of operational challenges that are happening at the same time. Okay, let's go, Ed.
Yeah, following up on the vaccine, stakeholders we've talked to, state leaders, medical experts, have said one of the questions that they're trying to figure out is how much vaccine is actually in the national stockpile right now. Do you have any sense of that yet?
Our team, as you know, has been on the ground for about 48 hours, but